Have you ever stopped and wondered what's really going on inside our bodies as we get older? I mean, yeah, we see the signs on the outside, right? The wrinkles, the gray hair. But today, we're going to dive deep right into the microscopic engine that's secretly driving this whole process, something called stem cell exhaustion. And think about this for a second. Why is it that a simple paper cut that would vanish in a day when you're 20 just seems to hang around forever when you're 60? Or why do we lose muscle and just generally feel a bit more frail over time? It's something we all experience, and the answer? Well, it's hiding deep inside our cells. And that brings us to the star of our show today, stem cell exhaustion. This is way more than just a scientific buzzword. It's a really powerful idea that is completely reshaping how scientists think about aging, and it might just hold the key to actually slowing it down. Okay, so to really get a grip on exhaustion, we first have to appreciate the incredible power of the very cells that are getting exhausted. Let's talk about our body's own master builders. Stem cells they're just amazing. They are the body's ultimate multi-tool. They're these blank slates that can become a brand new skin cell, a heart cell, a brain cell, you name it. They're our internal repair crew, on call 24/7. Constantly working to fix damage and just maintain, every part of you. So here's the crucial question. What happens when your repair crew starts to shrink? Well, as the years go by, our reserve pool of these super important stem cells starts to get depleted. They just lose their oomph, their ability to divide and do their job. And that decline? It's directly linked to all those signs of aging we recognize. But why? Why does this happen? Well, it turns out one of the biggest culprits is this tiny little mechanism that acts like a ticking clock, hidden inside every single one of our dividing cells. The best way to think about telomeres is to picture the little plastic tips on your shoelaces, the aglets. They're basically those, but for your DNA. They're these protective caps on the very ends of our chromosomes, and their whole job is to stop our precious genetic code from fraying every time a cell divides. But here's the catch. Every single time a cell makes a copy of itself, those telomeres get just a tiny, tiny bit shorter. It's a process called telomere attrition. And over a lifetime of cell divisions, they get shorter and shorter and shorter, pretty much acting like a countdown timer for that cell. So the big question is, what happens when that clock finally runs out? For decades, the textbook answer was pretty simple. The cell would either die, or it would enter this kind of zombie-like state called senescence. It was seen as a pretty quiet, clean end. But it turns out there's a major plot twist. And this plot twist, it isn't just some minor detail. It all comes down to a surprising cellular signal, a case of mistaken identity, really, that completely changes the story of how our most important cells get old. This all comes from a landmark study in 2021 published in Nature Communications that really zeroed in on this mystery. And what they found, well, it gave us a completely new explanation for what happens to our stem cells when their telomeres get critically short, and it challenged decades of scientific belief. Get this, they discovered this incredible 4-step process. So step 1, the telomeres get super short. Step 2, and this is the crazy part, the cell's own machinery mistakes these frayed DNA ends for an invading virus. Seriously, this triggers a massive false alarm, a powerful immune signal called an interferon response. Third, this emergency signal acts like a drill sergeant, basically screaming at the stem cells and forcing them all to differentiate down one single specific path. And fourth, this forced march into just one cell type prematurely uses up the entire stem cell population. It just drains the tank. This is a huge deal. As the authors themselves put it, their work challenges the historical hypothesis. In other words, they're saying the old story, that the cells just quietly die or retire, is wrong. They're not just fading away. They're being actively pushed off a cliff by a faulty internal alarm system. So, to put it really simply, stem cell exhaustion isn't a passive decline, it's an active process of self-sabotage. The cells are tricked into becoming just one thing, which drains the whole precious reserve pool that we desperately need to create all the different cells for repair. So what does this microscopic drama actually mean for our bodies as a whole? Well, this tiny cellular problem creates a massive domino effect that we can actually feel. This diagram just connects the dots perfectly. See, it all starts with that tiny molecular damage, the short telomeres. That leads to the cellular consequences, like the stem cell exhaustion we've been talking about. But that, in turn, triggers these huge systemic consequences that ripple through the whole body, like chronic inflammation. And those systemic consequences are things we actually notice. Weaker muscles, weaker bones, an immune system that's just not as sharp as it used to be, that slow wound healing we mentioned at the start, and this state of chronic low-grade inflammation that scientists have a name for, inflammaging. It all adds up to frailty, that loss of resilience that defines so much of the aging experience. Okay, I know this all sounds a bit grim, but here's where the story gets really, really exciting. Because if we understand the code, well, maybe we can learn to rewrite it. Researchers are already exploring some absolutely incredible strategies. There are things called senolytics, which are like garbage collectors for those old zombie cells. There are metabolic interventions that try to boost a cell's energy. And then there's the really futuristic stuff, like epigenetic reprogramming, which is basically an attempt to reset a cell's biological clock and make it young again. These are all fantastic avenues of research, but the discovery we've just been talking about, it points to an even more direct and maybe even more powerful target. What if, instead of trying to clean up the mess after the fact, you could just stop the false alarm from ever going off in the first place? What if you could just block that faulty emergency signal? And this is exactly what the researchers in that Nature study did. They used an experimental molecule to block the specific sensor that mistakes the telomeres for a virus. And in mice, it worked. It shut down the signal, it stopped the stem cells from being forced down that one path, and it preserved their function. I mean, that is an incredible proof of concept. Which leads us to this final, pretty profound question. If aging isn't just some random decay, but a series of specific biological programs written into our cells, then can we learn how to rewrite that code? This new research is one of the first most exciting hints that the answer might just be yes.